Well, hello everyone. Thank you to the Friends of the ABC for giving me this lovely opportunity to be part of your AGM, and particularly for making it possible for me to have a conversation with one of Australia's foremost journalists, commentators and authors, the legendary Kerry O'Brien. Welcome, Kerry.
Mignon, how are you?
Really great. Lovely to be speaking with you. Kerry,
well, the word legendary is usually associated with old age, Mignon. So.
Kerry, I'll just introduce you very briefly. I don't think you need any introduction. You are obviously one of Australia's best loved former ABC journalists as the host of the 7:30 Report and Four Corners, and we are delighted to welcome you here today. We have asked members of the Friends to send in questions, and so I'm going to start with the questions. Are you ready?
I am indeed.
Fantastic. Kerry, this question is from Con Anastas, and he's asking a question about funding. He wonders how we get the government of the day to acknowledge the critical role the national broadcaster plays in our community and appropriately fund the ABC.
Well, the problem, Con, is that the ABC is in the eye of a political storm and has been for the whole of this stretch of Conservative government in Canberra since 2013. And this isn't me being politically partisan. It is just plain for everyone to see that there has been this constant mission of inquiries that would seem to be designed to catch us out in one way or another, to put up further hurdles in front of a vibrant public broadcaster, coupled with a number of cuts to the ABC budget. And sometimes they come under the heading of efficiency, dividend and so on. The end result of all of the cuts is that the ABC is going backwards at a time when Australian media generally is in deep trouble, where there is, on an ongoing basis, and has been now since 1987, essentially, when Paul Keating rewrote the rules for Australian media ownership, where one media proprietor has somewhere between 65 and 70%, certainly of media reach via newspapers, if not actual ownership of the papers. I mean, he's got the ownership. It's just a question of how you phrase, whether it's readership or circulation. But the bottom line is that that the Murdoch near monopoly of print in Australia is deeply unhealthy for our democracy. The media generally is in bad shape. We're watching organisations like Fairfax, which for a long time could be regarded as quality, relatively independent, a relatively independent news voice in the commercial sector. But to me, it's kind of, we're watching it withering on the vine as we speak. And as Malcolm Turnbull said to me once, volunteered to me once, when he was the shadow communications spokesman, and not long before he went into government as the communications minister and then became prime minister. And he volunteered to me that in that environment then, like so early 2013, that in that media environment, Australia more than ever needed a vibrant and strong, independent public broadcaster. And yet he was a part of a process that then endeavoured to weaken the ABC. So how you actually appeal to the government we have now in Canberra to somehow express the kind of things that you might want to hear, that public broadcasting is important and has the full support of the government of the day, then I don't see how we can change this mindset, because to me it is based in prejudice and it's based in an ideological bias, which is ironic because that's what the ABC itself is accused of, falsely, I believe, and would argue until the cows come home with as much evidence as I can happily muster. So, Con, I don't have any smart ideas on how we can wave a wand and suddenly change the mindset of this government. And just let me very quickly add that Labor by comparison, is clever itself, has not always been the ABC's friend, and we don't ask for friends. I don't think the ABC asks for friends in government. It simply asks for the governments on both sides to use their intelligence and their I hope genuine concern to at least maintain those things that we value in Australia, if not strengthen them. That it is manifest that a strong public broadcaster is a fundamental part of a strong democracy.
Thank you, Kerry. Kerry, the Sydney Morning Herald this morning broke a story about the ABC news boss telling staff they were too focused on inner city left-wing elites. One ABC staff member told the SMH that they were worried that the implication was that news coverage should be shaped to please the government. What do you make of Gavin Morris's comments to ABC staff?
Well, as those comments were reported, and I noticed that an ABC spokesman has acknowledged some elements of truth within the broad frame of what that story suggests, I think it's deeply worrying and disturbing. Because at times like this, when the ABC is under siege, and I've been inside the ABC before when it was under political siege with the threat of, not just the threat, but the reality of budget cuts and sense of hostility about a strong independent public broadcaster. I understand how self-censorship works, and to me self-censorship is the most invidious form of censorship. Because it's hard to deal with, it's hard to put the finger on. But if people fear for their own financial security and their own welfare via a job and a career and an occupation, particularly, as I say, at a time when there are very few, there aren't that many alternatives for employment, particularly for senior journalists, for middle ranking and senior journalists, or for journalists generally. There aren't that many choices. So in hands where fear into the workplace and you're getting a message from your boss that says, we have to be concerned about how we are viewed by the government, no matter what words Gavin Morris used, clearly the import of those words for a number of the journalists who heard them was that there is a message in it that we have to be concerned about what the government thinks of us. And I don't think that ever was an issue for me and the journalists I worked with in the time I was there, and I was there for a long time. And we were there in bad times as well as good. You can't afford to be preoccupied, to take those things in as part of your kind of mindset. But things like climate change, which were thrown into the equation in this story as the kind of story that reporters might be spending too much time on or be too preoccupied by. Why would climate change be an issue for an inner city left elite? Why isn't climate change an issue for every single person on the globe? I mean, that is just outrageous for anybody to suggest that. Deeply irresponsible, and I think offensive. And so I just think that whatever Gavin Morris intended with his message, I see the reaction to his message, and it troubles and worries me deeply. And I think, frankly, that he should take note that that appears to be the reaction from at least a significant number of journalists who heard or saw him speak. And if that was not his intention, he needs to address it quickly. To say that that we should, and this was what was reported, that he is concerned that we reflect the interests of central Queensland as much as the inner city. Well, I mean, of course the ABC is providing news and information and analysis to all of Australia. But you can't have some kind of formula that says everything that's reported has to broadly reflect the views and interests or the issues that affect everyone everywhere in the country. That's just not the way news matters. Nobody does that. That's why you have regional outlets. That's why we have a regional ABC, to bring local stuff to regional centres like Central Queensland or wherever. But there's an implication. There is an implication. I mean, I frankly think that ABC, that the quality and tenor of ABC News is moving away from the sort of big picture stuff and becoming more and more engaged with police rounds and road accidents and the ilk. It worries me substantially.
There's a lot of murmurs of agreement from the crowd here. You've been reporting on climate change since 1979, and I know that you've expressed dismay that some of us share with regard to the reporting of this issue. I'm interested in your views on how the ABC has reported on this issue and perhaps should report on climate change. This idea of false balance, the commitment to sharing both sides of the story that in retrospect doesn't necessarily seem to be the most ethical way to approach such a big story. How can we do this job better covering climate change?
Well, I think for a start, Mignon, that at least the debate has moved on from whether the science of climate change is real or not, or whether climate change itself is real or not. I think that even those politicians who in the past have expressed scepticism, if not cynicism and outright rejection of the facts of climate change, I think some of those have put their cue in the rack and are now instead of preaching against climate change itself, are seeking to find ways to maintain a commitment to fossil fuels and shaping policies which really reflect almost a status quo. Whereas it seems to me that there is a very substantial urgency about countries demonstrating a clear commitment to zero emissions by whatever 2050 seems to be the current popular date. But we know that even if everybody met their Paris targets, we would still be heading for disaster. So I think that the reporting, the challenge for reporting today now is no longer about having to argue with the climate deniers and the so-called climate skeptics about whether the science is right or not. And I think that the role of journalists now is, while on the one hand to maintain the reporting on what is actually happening around the globe in terms of the frequency and intensity of weather events which are linked to climate change, but also to analysing the policies of governments to get past the smokescreens and to actually tell us the true story of which are the credible policies and which aren't. Now that still requires debate, and it requires us to have an open mind from the various voices to the debate as to who's got the credibility and who hasn't. But at the same time, we need to be fearless in our investigation of these things and of telling it as it is, and calling a spade when it comes to the integrity of the policies.
Kerry, The Guardian has been taking a different line on this for some time, and they're resourcing in a time of difficulty with resourcing public interest journalism. They really have been resourcing covering climate change. Do you think the ABC needs to change the way they resource reporting so that this issue is covered better?
I think the real problem with the ABC is funding generally, and it's funding for all programs, and it's funding broadly for adequate news coverage at all its levels of the straight news bulletins, the analysis behind the news, the longer form journalism, the various the support for the various platforms. But no matter how many platforms you're juggling, the fundamental core strength of the ABC is always going to be the quality of its content. And I think that we're just reminded of that when we see some of the impacts of the last sets of cutbacks. For instance, the disappearance of the 7:45 AM national radio news, which has been around forever. And I don't automatically support any program simply because it's been around for a long time. I think all programs have to continue to justify themselves, and whether a program needs to lift its game because it's being led by funding or because it's got tired and needs a boost in some way or another rather than to be shut down, or whether programs do need to change. I mean, the nature of the changes in the delivery of news is just dynamic. And so I would always, if I was running any ABC program or programs, I would always want to be satisfying myself that the nature of the programs and the way they're being delivered is absolutely relevant to the now. But at the same time, if I had to cut a program for budget reasons, I'd be saying I was cutting it for budget reasons and not making up some bullshit excuse that's to rationalise it, because you might offend the government by saying out and out, this program has gone because of those budget cuts. So look, just very quickly, in terms of finding new ways to fund particular things, I don't think. I'm not impressed by an argument that says climate change is a particularly important topic, so the ABC needs to raise money particularly so it can report climate change. I don't believe that's the way public broadcasting news gathering should work.
Kerry, talking of quality, Kathy Barden, who is the secretary of the WA branch of the Friends, is concerned about a potential decision to dumb down or maybe broaden the appeal of the 7 p.m. TV news. She brought up the example of a recent item about AFL players' babies. She wonders what you think of this and asks, is this move resulting in any improvement in ratings, or is it just annoying regular viewers?
Well, these days ratings rarely improve in news and current affairs programs because the trend is almost universally going the other way. That is in the main. I mean, if you add all the various platforms, like I do, or online, the picture isn't so grim. But nonetheless, that is where the trend is. The trend is down because our appetites are being fed in other ways, and you've got the Netflix syndrome and all those other streaming services with huge money and huge resources, including now in documentary, even in Australia. But I just sorry, and I've missed the point of the question.
Just wondering what you think of this potential broadening of the appeal.
Well, it worries me. Again, it worries me, and I see the evidence myself. I mean, I know years, for a very long time, ABC News has constantly been inclined to review how it's going with its audience, how relevant it is in its news for its audience. Is it meeting the charter obligations? And somewhere in the mix of making judgments about what programs to actually send out, including news programs, is the need for relevance. Somewhere in there is a kind of critical mass that the ABC needs to have to be able to demonstrate that it is relevant out there to the national community. Now, what that number is a matter for fine judgment within the place. But I do think that that there has been a noticeable change in the content and even at times in the quality and depth of news. I mean, the so-called rant, where the reporter just walks through a location talking, or where constant, and I haven't done the sums, but a significant amount of any news bulletin these days seems to be taken up simply by a reporter reporting to a camera. And that has its place as a part of the overall structure of news programming. But some of it delivers depth, some of it is done very well, some of it is just skating across the surface and providing a veneer of news coverage, and some of it is basically, fire, ambulance and police chasing. And I think that there is a risk that the ABC, that the news judgment is tilting more towards that sort of tabloid or populist end of news, and away a little more from the serious and important.
On that, Moira Maley from the southern West Australian town of Albany, a member, is disappointed with the way that the 7:30 report has evolved since your time. She feels that the format has changed to a lot of pre-prepared stories, and that that has meant a loss of honesty and vitality and questioning, and also that opportunity for the guests to speak in their own voice. So she wonders if you feel the same way, and specifically wonders if you think that the pre-prepared packages should come with an introduction that tell the audience explicitly what the purpose or perhaps slant of the story is.
Well, to be absolutely honest, I think the fundamental format of 7:30 is almost exactly the same as it was when I left. At times, the balance of content might have been different, but you've got Lee Sales. We expect that we'll get, most days, we'll get a strong political interview from Lee, or we might get an important and serious interview on something else entirely, and occasionally she'll break it up, doing those kind of what they used to call the open shirt interviews that I used to do, meaning that I'd throw the tie away. So in other words, they might be more, you want to say softer, but they were different kinds of interviews, and they might be with writers or directors of films or people in the game of ideas and the arts. And so I think that mix tends to be roughly the same as it is now. One of the things that impresses me about the 7:30 in the recent past has been that they have done, contrary to what the question suggests, they've actually devoted several days to a single story, analysing, don't ask me to try and remember the actual individual ones, but I know there have been a few recently, and one was, I think, trying to analyse the framework for economic recovery. I think Alan Kohler, for instance, did some quite in-depth reporting, and he did it over several days, so that it wasn't just a one-hit wonder that then went out the window. So in terms of having a declaration at the start of a story in the introduction saying what slant it was going to be, I would say that the purpose of the introduction always was, when I was there, and still is, that you simply try to set a background scene to what people might expect in the story, or why we're doing the story, and then you let the storyteller then tell the story over the 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 minutes. And there are, I think, look, I don't know whether it's a very similar mix, but in my day we had some stories that we might have given the reporter the luxury of 4 or 5 days to, and if it was really, really important and complex, longer even than that, to do a story. And that would be mixed with some stories which were same-day stories. So they were on-the-pace stories that had to be told that day, or they'd be dated, or there was a certain urgency about telling them on that day. And so our reporters would do a fast turnaround, and sometimes you'd have to make some sacrifices to get it up in a single day. And those, again, were always matters for judgment. I don't think that has changed. So whether the mix of stories is exactly the same, that's a matter for each person's individual judgment. But I wouldn't lose faith in 7:30, and I think it's in pretty good hands.
Furious.
I hear the sound of one hand clapping.
Yeah. Kerry, further on that, you mentioned your open shirt interviews and your interviewing style. I think a lot of us are nostalgic for something that I think is a very admired skill of yours, and that was your ability to talk to politicians and get an answer. And it seems that politicians are more and more adept at evading questions. There's this repeated assertion of their talking points, and factual rebuttals are ignored. And this is kind of annoying for everybody. It's this post-truth politics. So I guess I'm wondering, do you think it is more difficult to get straight answers today?
Oh, I think that's been the case for a very long time. I think it's been a part of the evolution of the whole political process, say, in the last 40 years. And you go all the way back to Gough Whitlam, I guess, in terms of the professionalising of the whole political operation of a government. And there is an argument for any minister having an adequate number of staff to advise on policy and to advise on media. I mean, it's an important part of a government process in a democracy to actually disseminate information on the policies that you are trying to perpetrate, and that you come on the, that you make yourself available to media through press conferences and interviews to actually answer questions. But I think that the straitjacket has been slowly and steadily put together with a kind of iron mesh now, where it is now just a kind of dull dance between the interviewer and the politician to try and extract something real and genuine on behalf of the audience. And politicians' reputations have suffered as a result. And if politicians think, I mean, if the interviewer is adept enough, as I believe Lee Sales is, for instance, and there's now quite a stable of good interviewers at the ABC across the breadth of programming, and the Drum is no exception, if the interviewer is skilled enough, then the public at the end of the interview is going to be left in no doubt of the obfuscation of a politician who doesn't want to answer questions that are a bit tricky. The audience, it's abundantly clear to me that the audience has had that ability for a long time. And that's a part of the reason that there's so much cynicism out there against politicians, because they feel that too often they just don't get a straight answer, and that politicians have simply come along to use a program as a soapbox rather than show a genuine respect for the process and see it as a part of a vibrant democracy and see it as a fundamental right of the public to be respected in that way. There's no easy way to deal with it. You can ask the same question 3 or 4 or 5 times. I think my record was 9. I know Jeremy Paxman at the BBC racked up 15 repeats of the same question of a health minister at the time. That's quite a number of years ago now. And it becomes almost comedy in the end, but sad comedy, sad. A sad reflection on us all in the end. I think also that journalists have to constantly question their own efficacies, their own what drives them, what motivates them. Never lose respect for their audience. Actually, put the audience first. Put their own egos somewhere back in the mix. That they're not there primarily to enhance their career. They're there. It's almost a vocation in a way, without making too much of it, to actually prosecute their role as the scrutinisers of the democratic process, of the blocks of power, public and private. And they're cliches, calling people to account, shining a light in the dark corners, all that stuff, but it's true. Like so many cliches, it's true. And so journalists should never lose the desire, not just for the chase, but to actually deliver what they're there to deliver for the audience.
Thank you for that. Kerry, you talked then about the professionalising of government and the role of journalism in democracy. You've also spoken out about the lack of continuous quality leadership in Australia and said that the two-party system is letting us down. And you said that on Q&A, but you didn't have time to tell us more about that. Can you tell us more about that point that you're making?
Well, I think again the evidence is there that the quality of government and the effectiveness of government has been in decline for some time. I think the polarisation of politics is an element of the equation, and the polarisation of the media is another part of the process as well that I don't like. I think that in terms of the internal political processes of the major parties, I think Labor was the first to professionalise, if you like, its factional system. It went up to and including the Whitlam era. The factions tended to be engaged as often as not in genuine ideological warfare and personality conflict that at one point actually split their party. And with the rise of post-Gough Labor parliamentary parties, first Hayden, then Hawke, then Keating, they actually brought a kind of discipline to the factional system, which allowed for a much more measured processing of policies and kind of an allowance to manage the ideological differences within their party, so that it actually was arguably a part of a genuinely democratic internal framework. But part of that process also was who's next on the queue to get promoted. And I think what happened, particularly post-Keating, I think what's happened on the Labor side is that you see the rise of more, it can be a cruel word, hack, but and it's certainly not true of all, but there are too many hacks who've risen to the top. When I say the top, they've risen to the front bench. They've even got their place in Parliament as a result of whatever factional strings have been pulled, and it's your turn, and it's your turn, and it's your turn. And people are not being chosen necessarily because they are the best person within an electorate to represent Labor, or they're the best person in the Senate to represent Labor on the front bench or on the House of Reps, or even to go into a leadership position. And then I think the same has also happened on the Conservative side. I think that that in fact the Conservative side of politics seems to have moved closer to something not as vociferous, but something akin to those Labor years in the wilderness in the 50s and even in the 60s. That kind of zealotry that you see on the far right of the Liberal Party, where people like Cory Bernardi have gone off and started their own Conservative parties, and you've got this extreme end of the Liberal Party that at times has been like the tail wagging the dog. And one way or another, that process, I think, has also let down the Liberal Party. And that was a part of the disappointment of Malcolm Turnbull when he became leader. I think given the state of politics on both sides of the Parliament, when Malcolm Turnbull moved to knock over Tony Abbott, he was promising a fresh approach. And I think that there were a number of traditionally Labor people around Australia who may have voted for him if he had called an almost immediate election, because they were so disillusioned with the politics that they had normally supported, and thought they were convinced by Turnbull that he might actually be somebody worth backing for a time. And almost within days, he had let his entire constituency down. Let's call it the constituency of hope. He'd let them down and became just another career politician. And that just added to an extra layer of cynicism and disappointment to the whole process. So that's what I mean when I say that. And the other evidence of that, I guess, is the rise of independence. I mean, the Senate at times has been there's been various displays of stupidity from some of the bit players in the Senate, but there have also been some quite interesting people finding their way into the Senate outside of the major parties in the relatively recent past, say the last 10 years, who have on occasions with important policy shown a kind of maturity which has strengthened rather than weakened the process. And I think that if you look at the calibre by and large of the independents in the House of Representatives, they're an interesting bunch. And I think at least some of them have genuine commitment to a strong democracy. And I think that if the major parties don't wake up and get their houses in order, then we're going to see more of that. And you may see, even though our system here, our system of voting favours a sort of two-party system rather than what you see in New Zealand, for instance, where the voting system means that you'll get coalitions forming in government almost as the norm rather than the exception. Here we're the other way. But that's basically what I meant about the failure of the two-party system, and climate change is a perfect kind of subject to use to actually illustrate what I'm talking about, because there's been a massive failure of policy really on both sides on climate change.
Mm. Thank you, Kerry. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about democracy in Australia. Stan Grant this morning on the ABC was talking about a virus that isn't the coronavirus. He's talking about a move towards increased government control and lamenting, the lack of press freedom, the influence of the Murdoch press, the polarising media, amongst many other things. I wonder, do you think we're witnessing the end days of democracy in Australia, or are you feeling more positive about the strength of our democracy?
Well, I'm neither feeling particularly positive, but I'm certainly not seeing the end days of democracy. What I think we all have to be on guard against is this sort of slow drift and at times accelerating drift down the road to authoritarianism. I think we're much further back on that road than America is and some of those illiberal democracies in Europe. But there is a trend. There is a trend amongst what you might call traditional Western democracies. You're seeing the decline of real political debate. You're seeing a decline of real political will. You're seeing a combination of sort of individual self-interest and group self-interest with kind of mixtures in some places of ideology. I don't think there's much ideology from Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is just a totally self-interested, unscrupulous individual for whom political convention has no place unless it suits him, unless it enhances him personally. I still have trouble wrapping my mind around the rate at which he peddles lies about his capacity to stare unblinkingly down a camera lens and talk about, the beautiful love that African Americans have for him, and his narcissism knows no bounds. But it's dangerous because his own party has become even more corrupted in his time in terms of any kind of base morality pinning that party up, because they've gone along with him 99% of the way simply because they saw him as a Republican senator, a Republican president who might be able to deliver some of their favourite things, like peeling back Obamacare, like stacking the Supreme Court and so on. And in the meantime, ethics and morality have gone out the window completely. I mean, America has always been an interesting set of contradictions to me, and you can find institutionalized corruption in the United States going back to the late 1900s on both sides. Have a look at the kind of tricks the Democrats used to get up to in what was called Tammany Hall politics around New York. I mean, this world's great democracy has always been a deeply flawed democracy, but never more than now. And the problems that have helped the rise of Donald Trump are so deeply entrenched now that there are large swathes of that country that they are almost impossible to kind of turn around. And it's ugly, it's ugly. But we're not in a position to throw stones. There's no room for smugness here. our racism is palpable. You know, our history of racism is undeniable, regardless of what the Andrew Bolts and others might say. Written in blood, really. Written in shame.
Kerry, we've almost come to the end of the time that we have together. So I have just one last question, and it relates to your vision for the ABC. What do you think should happen to the ABC?
Well, I think that it really starts with setting up a framework of integrity for the board appointments from the chair and the other directors. That there needs to be an understanding about the kind of calibre that's required of those directors. That the charter, that those people need to really understand what that charter means. That they have to have a demonstrable commitment to public broadcasting, to the absolute fundamentals of public and the ideals of public broadcasting. That they have to be able to demonstrate on an ongoing and regular basis that they do understand what it means to be independent of the government while meeting its charter. Being answerable to the processes of scrutiny that a parliament might apply, not a government, but a parliament might apply. But I think part of the problem for the ABC is that it has become corporatised in the way so many public institutions have. We're almost a part of a privatisation process without being privatised. You know, we have a chief executive earning, if the reports are correct, more than $1 million a year. We have senior executives at the ABC being paid $600,000 a year for doing jobs that even 10 years ago might have attracted a third of that. And I think there's always got to be some relationship between the public sector and the private, and that the public sector always has to have the means to be able to attract talent, but not just through money. Not just through money. You do have to hope that there'll always be a certain number of people who will want to be a part of the pursuit of excellence, who will want to be a part of a public process as opposed to a process for profit. And so it worries me in the same way as it worries me the route that universities have taken and the changes we've seen, you know, the corporatising and the soft privatisation of so many institutions. I fear for all of those things. So, you know, this is not something where you wave a magic wand or one person comes in as the chief executive or the chair of the ABC and changes all that. You can't. It's got to be part of a bigger process. And this is what I started to kind of try to articulate on that Q&A program, not very well. And that is that the whole box and dice needs to be thrown up in the air. But where do we find our platforms to debate them? Where is the hunger for that debate at the level of the participants? Instead of just constantly feeding us the trash that we get, and the mouths are opening and the lips are moving and words are coming out, and they often mean absolutely nothing. You know, it's like we are just the onlookers in a giant marketing process. So look, you know, like many of your questions, Mignon, it's there is no easy answer to this, but somehow recreating a healthy framework for a public broadcaster that can not just retain the trust it has, but to build on that trust and be something of a beacon for the whole public sector, whether it is the public service departments, or whether it is statutory authorities like the ABC or whatever we are. But you know what I'm saying. There is a sickness in the community now. I think that the public-private stuff is a mishmash, and the infiltration of that corporate mentality and the sort of corporate culture into the public sector is profound. Very hard to measure, but you can see the impacts of it, and they're not all good, you know. And everything has been in the name of the dollar, Not so much the dollar in profit, but the dollar saved. Everything is in the name of efficiency, and efficiency can mean different things to different people. And the implication is, I'm going to run this efficiently means that it wasn't run efficiently before. The ABC at times has been inefficient, but at times I've seen enormous efficiency in that place. So efficiency can mean different things to different people. And in the ABC's case, that efficiency has been sadly hobbled. I'm sorry we haven't had much time for fun and laughter here today, but them's the breaks, you know, that's the reality.
It is.
And can I just say, more power to you all. I've mingled with friends now for decades, and they've always been heartened and impressed by the level of the generosity of people prepared to continue to get out there and make an effort to try and make a difference for something that they know is important, not just to them, but their children, their grandchildren, their friends and neighbours, and so it goes. So thank you for that, even though I'm out of it now.
And carry on that. Is there anything that you could suggest that the WA Friends of the ABC could do to support the ABC?
I think you've just got to continue to do what you're doing and have done for a long time, but and not be put off by those people who try and throw stones at you and scorn as, you know, you're a kind of dad's army. That's bullshit. It is. It's bullshit. It's the fact that, and I know many of you might be retired from what you might call, you know, traditional work, but that doesn't mean that your time still isn't precious to you, and you are prepared to give that time. And I've heard so many. And there is, you know, Keating calls it distilled wisdom. That's what you have. You know, you have wisdom. You have the wisdom from all those bloody terrible mistakes you've made that you still remember in the middle of the night some nights. We've learned from those things, and amongst those things that might not be useful to younger generations, there is a real wisdom amongst us all that is reflected, and it's there to be mined. So keep it up and just try to keep recruiting and keep gathering the numbers. There you go.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Thank you so much for your conversation today on behalf of everyone here, both on Zoom and in person. It's been such a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Well, I hope it's been of some use to you, and thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to pass you now, Kerry, to the President of the WA Friends of the ABC, Bobby Mackley. Bobby?
Yep. Thank you. I have to lower the mic about a foot.
Well, the mic, and not to mention the camera.
Is Kerry still with us? Kerry?
I am.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've all seen you on our screens of various sizes, but this has been quite a different experience to have you talking directly to us in relaxed, no script. It's been really fantastic, and you've given us a lot to think about, and we agree. I think most of us seem to agree with a lot of what you've said. So again, thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to us today. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Real pleasure, Bobby. Thank you.